Hey everyone, thanks for welcome to our June campfire. This is a special one, and again, the campfire series evolves as the topics do, and trying to find out the right format for the right conversations. Some of this was sparked. Note that I noticed that the IAB had, released for comment terms and conditions, and I figured it'd be one of those things that like too many people are going to just let that period go by, not comment, and then complain afterwards. And we can't work that way. Not as an industry, not as publishers, not as partners that support publishers. We have to be in these conversations. We need to help drive these conversations where they need to go. Uh, then that alone was just a statement. And then Scott reached out and basically said, we need to actually do a campfire. We need to actually have a call about this. So I appreciate Scott kind of the effort and also kind of putting together the structure for this conversation. Uh, as I said before, this is to be an interactive session. By all means, let's use the chat at the beginning. There is a part where we'll get to kind of Q&A and stuff like that, at which point microphones, raising hands, all that kind of stuff. I expect it. I want it to happen, but I also just want to have a good, solid recording of the materials. What I can tell you, last thing I'll just say is that this is just one piece of many things that the IAB is doing right now. Um, and again, these conversations are happening, and I ask all of you to raise your hand to be involved in these. Uh, they have value. They need a fresh perspectives, and all of us deal with this all the time. Last thing I'll just say is I'll do Chatham House rule. Just the fact of the matter is we are recording this, so if for some reason you want to say something, you don't want it on the record, let me know and I'll pause the recording. But I have a feeling that we don't really need to do that today. Let's just kind of dive into the material. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Scott and Angelina.
Hello, and thank you all. Rob, appreciate it. Melissa and Nick as well. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. And Angelina, thank you for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Messer, principal and founder of Messer Media, as well as the Ad Tech Therapy Advisory Service. Today, we bring you something very important, which is, as Rob said, to be aware and to not complain later when things are cemented in our industry. I'll have Angelina introduce herself in just one short second, but I want to thank you all for being here because this is the first step in actually doing something. And as we know, Beeler.Tech is the group of doing stuff. So thank you for joining us on this journey. Angelina, can you give yourself a quick introduction and a little background of yourself? She is quite an esteemed member of the ad tech community.
Hi there, and thank you for having me. So I am the VP of the Measurement, Adjustability, and Data Center at IAB. I've been in this industry for about 30 years, predominantly on the buy side, and I was a media director. I led large media teams, and then I ran ad ops for Dentsu and Merkle, and was a active member of the IAB at the time before I came here. One of the things that I've been here for about 5 years, and there has always been conversations internally about how 3.0 is outdated and that we need a new, fresh perspective of how we approach contracts, and that it shouldn't just be focused on direct buys, but now with programmatic and various ad platforms that are now part of the supply chain that we need to address contract terms across the entire ecosystem, from ad servers to measurement platforms, ad verifications, DSPs, SSPs, and develop something that can be foundational, and be a little bit more fluid in terms of updating more frequently. So that is our commitment over the next 2 to 3 years, is to continue to develop different terms and conditions agreements that sits on top of what we're now calling the general terms, which is what we're going to go through today. I'm going to be sharing. One is, Rob, thank you very much for that intro. What I will say is that things that go into public comments, such as this document, as well as others, and I'd love to talk about the others later on, is that it's important that we get buy side, sell side, and intermediary firms and their feedback on these terms and conditions, because once they're established, they're out in the market. And we have task force that we're recruiting people from to actually participate and join these groups. So I'm gonna link in this document. There you can find a form where anything, if your organization is not an IAB member, you can participate in this task force. What you'll be required to fill out for your organization is an intellectual property rights agreement in order to participate, because what gets shared collectively in these groups. So I encourage everyone to after this call, if you're interested in participating in all the variations of terms and conditions agreements, that would be great. I look forward to hearing all your feedback.
Thank you very much, Angelina, for that introduction and for how we're going to do it. We'll follow up at the end of some recommendations as well for how to participate. We do have some materials prepared for you today. And this is a super fancy cover of the IAB General Terms and Conditions, as I call them, version 4.0, because the old ones were called version 3.0. In my
I don't think
mind, it
we're
is
calling
the
it 4.0 on our side yet, but we'll see.
we'll see if it sticks. I don't think you're gonna get away from it, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Um, in my mind, version 3 of, I think it was called the IAB 4A's terms and conditions 3.0 was
For
the
direct
name of
buys
the
for one
document,
year.
is
Yeah, for direct buys only for 1 year or
for
less.
direct buys of 1 year, was perhaps the most widely used agreement in all of MarTech and AdTech. I've seen internal IOs based on it. I've seen agency IOs based on it. I've seen IOs with pages of addendums added to it that became standard corporate. It was the easy button. If you wanted to get a deal done, all you had to do is say, it's on IAB paperwork. And every side knew, like, okay, we can sign that. Or I need one or two sentences added to it. But that document is wildly outdated. It is um, three of four. Four is on its way right now. But if we take a brief history back to what it was, the first one actually came out in 2001. And it was sort of a first stab effort at reducing complexity, finding some common language, but it didn't do its job and it wasn't that great. So they quickly made a new change to version 2.0, which happened in 2002. And it actually began the collaborative process between agencies and publishers. And this would be the 4A's talking to the IAB. And it brought in new concepts like third-party ad serving, some limits of liability and limitations, and some more comprehensive definitions and streamlined language. If you think back all the way to 2002 of what the internet looked like that back then, this is pre-iPhone. This is way early days. Not a lot of stuff existed. So it's kind of a surprise that it made it all the way to 2010 without needing a change. But I think in 2010, you were starting to really feel the heat of how ad tech started to change. And that's when version 3 was released. That document had some major updates into digital data usage and ownership. Section 12D1 is still my favorite. Beeler, I presented that for you, God, in like 2017, 2018, of like how to know this clause, how to understand it, and how to use it. That is literally the reason why I joined this task force, was to make sure that that clause remained and that publishers were still protected in their data usage rights. And then things like billing and cancellation and indemnity clauses started to show up. It was the beginning of programmatic and measurement standards, but in 2010, we were pre SSPs. We were still in the ad network era. Mobile wasn't really a thing yet. We hadn't had the year of mobile yet. And then all of that happened. Social media, programmatic advertising, connected CTV, streaming, and now AI driven ad placements. And the industry is at a loss for how to keep using this document. And so we need to move it forward. But you can see just from the length of time that these things are sticking around, which is longer and longer, that this document might be around for 15 years, which is why now is the time to talk about it. Because once it becomes permanent or released to general availability, it will become the basis of your contracts. And it will, again, be the most widely used document in ad tech. Or it becomes the least used document in ad tech. And that sucks because it was so great having 3.0. So if 4.0 is terrible and nobody wants to use it or can agree on it, that's equally bad. So we need to move this all forward. I sit in the I'm in the committee. It was chopped up into a bunch of groups to look at different sections of 3.0 and to translate them. And Angeline, I think the group was called like data indemnifications and liabilities. It was the boring stuff. It was the dry stuff, but incredibly important because that's what underpins it. And so it was great to see agencies, publishers, advertisers, sort of everyone in the room, but it was a smattering. A few opinions that I think drove the conversation well, but not everything ended in a unanimous decision. In fact, most of them ended with, okay, thanks for all the comments. We will try to find something that appeases everyone. And you're going to see some things in this new document that you're like, oh, that's really interesting. So from here, we're going to go through a little bit of the document. It's going to be more about the structure of the document, what's included in the document, but not actually the language of the document. That's what comes next. So let's take a look into what's in the document.
Yeah, and I want to caveat that both Scott and I are not legal attorneys. We don't, although we've had roles where this is our day-to-day job is to look at contracts and to make sure that there is fair and equitable terms for both parties or for multiple parties, that I can't speak to any specific term at this moment. However, the purpose of the public comment is to get the feedback from this industry of how we can continue to modify or include additional terms or remove specific terms that you feel are not, are not appropriate. So this is definitely the time for additional feedback. And although we have a public comment end date of July 21st, we will continue to take feedback because the task force is going to continue to work. And we have several different agreements that we have on the docket to work on, which leads right well into this page. So.
Mm-hmm. And I echo Angelina's sentiments on that. I'm not a lawyer, and you don't need to be a lawyer to participate in this. You can join the committees and give your opinions on how ad tech and martech and digital media works. The lawyers will then figure it out. It's actually very helpful to have them and us there because the lawyers don't always know how to do it, and we don't know always how to say it. So it is a collaborative place. The Document 4.0 is a new version. It is a new concept to how this document is structured. Version 3.0 is roughly like 15 or 17 sections long. It was one single document. And if you wanted to amend anything, you had to do it with an actual amendment that your own legal team had to make, or you had to figure it out. This new version sits with a master agreement, which is is in public comment period today. It's called the general terms, Angelina, I believe. So that's what that becomes. And then there's 6 different addendums that are planned and are in the works to be released alongside of it. The reason why I bring this up before is because when you read the document, you're going to be like, what happened to all this other stuff? Well, they moved it into these addendum because those are specific use cases of ad tech, and the addendums care for individual use cases, restrictions, liabilities, things. The difference between content and SSPs are very different. So it's sort of broken into 4 groups, and I'll go deeper into these. It's DSPs and SSPs, ad servers, measurement and ad verification services, direct buys, and programmatic transactions. These specific ones, I think it's fairly straightforward. These also haven't been released yet, so they're still in the works. I've seen them, I've heard groups working on them. there's a lot in here, and I'm going to be just as vocal about getting you to look at the addendums as we are at looking at the master agreement. Direct buys covers your upfront deals, sponsorships, social media transactions, DSPs and SSPs. I think this would be a really great move to, instead of having a bunch of one-off agreements for every single SSP or DSP that a client's going to work with, you can now move to a much more standard set of terms. I know the legal teams would greatly appreciate that. And for anyone who's trying to onboard a bunch of new customers, clients, SSPs, DSPs as it is, would appreciate something that's more standard inside of there.
Yeah, and for clarification, the addendas are not officially developed yet. So that is why you don't see them on the website. Right now, we only release the general core terms because those will act as the foundation for all the addendas that we're working on. So this is a good 2 to 3 year initiative. And we are prioritizing direct buys and sponsorship deals as the first one to go right after the general terms. We will be kicking off the task force sometime this summer when hopefully people are around. But if anything, the real work is going to probably happen in September. And the goal is to get the direct buy terms out by January for public comment.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at one of my new favorite parts of version 4.0, which is the checkboxes in the MSA or in the general terms. This is a new concept that shows up in 3.0, shows up in 4, and it's actually pretty handy and pretty unique. As you went through the document, you probably noticed that there was a bunch of sections where there were checkboxes enabled. This is to allow for what I would say like conformity within flexibility. So there is always an other line that two parties can choose. But if you wanted to talk about your payment term length, there's 15 days, 30 days, 45 days, and 90 days as checkboxes. And so some of those checkboxes are designation of representative, that's an easy one. Invoice and billing, method, period, cadence, payable timing, and disputes. That is a very meaty section, and I know is a very large concern to every person on this call. So you need to understand what's being laid out on the table inside of this. Payment liability. I'm going to talk about defaults in a second. IP infringement, rapid warranty, liability caps, governing law, dispute resolution. If you've ever sat with your legal team, they read these things. It's the boilerplate. And they're usually like where the red lines come in and somebody says, I can't, that we can't have this uncapped or that's too much damages. These are check boxes to make things easier for them. And we tried to find sort of the average of what people were recommending. And then we picked one or two on the left and right of sort of the extremes over there. What I want to call out is the defaults in all of these sections. And there are checkboxes. Sorry. There are checkbox defaults. And what that means is if you sign the agreement as it is downloaded from the website, you will agree to those things. So what I'm going to recommend later is that your legal team understands what each of those checkboxes mean and what you're willing to tolerate, accept, and will not accept. This is also a very large part of what is open for discussion in the public comment is which items are checked by default. Should sequential liability be the default?
That was comment. But yes, I will write that up.
It was a rhetorical question, and your comment is noted. But as a publisher, I don't think you necessarily want it to be. As an agency, you don't actually really care too much. The vendors in the middle certainly care a lot. So you can see how this thing starts to bunch up in the middle. So keep an eye out for your checkboxes. Inside the master agreement, there's some key elements and sections that you'll want to take a look at. Some of these carry over from 3.0, so I'll go through these quickly. Invoicing and related terms, performance obligations, confidentiality, and data protection. The data section in the general terms is actually very light. I made a very large push for more of the original language to be present in the general terms. And I was overruled, and that language is getting pushed into the addendums because they get handled and treated differently. Um,
Yes.
I'm still going to
And
push.
yeah.
We don't have to discuss this, Angelina. I'm just saying what I did,
Yeah.
but you may comment on however you like.
Yeah, I would say that, part of the conflict that we have with the data was that if you think about different use cases, an ad verification company versus a DSP versus a measurement provider versus a publisher, the way they handle data is very different. So we do recognize that the data sections within the addendums are probably going to be a lot more meatier. But in terms of the general terms, that's where we felt having a baseline, at least the start, and then the addendums will address the specific use cases and especially how different parties handle data and what data they're actually collecting, right? So in an identity solution, partner obviously is handling more first party data and anonymizing it versus an ad server, which is predominantly a proxy or a cookie or some sort of ad server ID, right? So how they handle data is different.
So, perfect example of why we need more voices in these meetings, right? Because Angelina's point's well taken. And I bet in review, you'd understand why Scott is pushing back. And it takes understanding the nuance of that and doing it versus whatever, and again, complaining after. So, appreciate the two of you playing role playing right there. That is very helpful as to what has to happen.
We are appreciative to have the time. Uh, I made a little handy guide for you to understand a little bit of what has changed in here. So we take some of those areas of the contract on the left, and then the right side, it's version 4. What does it do? The service coverage, as we've stated before, this covers a much broader area than just um, sort of direct buys, but now we go into all those specific addendum areas. The modular structure is entirely new for this. I think it's incredibly helpful. It's really way better than having to do one-off amendments to handle a bunch of the things that were basic negotiations. Payment flexibility comes inside of here. Enhanced data privacy. There is more of a concept of the DPA. There's an emphasis on the MSPA, right? And using some of the other existing document inside of the AAB that already exists. That was an interesting thing that I noticed. I mean, you're going to see this more is like, should the industry push for more use of IAB and agreed documents, even things like IAB specs, and like, should there be an adherence to adhering to better ad standards or the open RTB protocols as part of your agreement. So you're going to see some interesting components show up in some of the addendums. Uh, the roles of the parties, customers, representatives, who are you? Those things were sort of split out a little bit better because you start to see people on both sides. The modern dispute resolution, contracts aren't for when things go right, they're for when things go wrong. So you should have dispute resolution inside of there. Platform and API terms. The word platform is actually well defined within this agreement, and many things become a platform, and the API usage that goes along with it, it starts to have that language in there that wasn't really in version 3.0. And I think for a lot of our vendor friends, it becomes a really important area that you're going to want to focus on because this is sort of the building block for those SSP and DSP contracts. And then affiliate agreements, and it starts to break out like some different payment types through the affiliates. So not only is it a new structure, but there are also new sections, new concepts, and expanded areas to look into as well. Oh my goodness. There is a big section of changes of specifically like what changed. I think we have time, so I can go through a few of these.
You've got time.
Thank you very much. The scope and structure we talked about, the payment terms Instead of having like a standard invoicing and 30-day payment with sequential liability, it moves into multiple invoicing cadences, detailed tracking. The 45-day payment is the default one, FYI. And there's multiple liability models that can sort of come in as the sequential part. We talked about data protection, the roles, the dispute resolution, um, escalation policies, mediation, arbitration procedures, all with like IAB approved mediators. This is helpful stuff that most people didn't think about or smaller companies wouldn't really negotiate on. So I'm glad to see these things show up. We talked about the platform and API use. The confidentiality sort of broadens a little bit and data gets pulled into it. Um, and then intellectual property becomes more pre-existing materials, deliverables, and licenses. I think this had a lot to do with sponsored content, influencer content that was being created. That was sort of the mind for that. And then, as we mentioned, an affiliate agreement is in there, and there's the force majeure clause for disasters that got expanded a little bit. So there was a lot of thought and detail that went into this. These calls were fun and long and interesting. But I really do commend the IAB for putting together these task forces and going through it. If you look at the list of participating companies, I think there's over 100 almost. I think I remember 200. It's
About
200 companies,
150, 200, yeah.
150 participating in this. In the 2010 document, there were, I think it was quoted at over 100 companies participated in the 3.0, which back then was a lot of companies. This is a big collaborative effort. And so if we get it right, we can use this document a lot. And if we get it wrong, it's either going to be forced upon us or it won't be used, neither of which are good outcomes.
Agreed.
As we sort of wind down here, I have my unofficial guide for you, and I have to disclaim that this is not endorsed by the IAB. First, do it yourself. Read, learn, and form your own opinion. This is very helpful, not only for being in bars and talking about it, but also for submitting your public comments. To involve your legal team now. I see a lot of lawyers and privacy-minded people on the call, so thank you very much. But decide if this warrants a larger conversation with your executive leaders. How important is that version 3.0 document to your existing sort of workflow and company structure? And then how many of these version 4.0 changes will impact how you run your business or how you want to use this document? And I think that's a good barometer for, do you need to tell your CEO that like this thing is coming? If it's that important to your company and your CEO doesn't already know about it, I would be a little bit concerned. But nonetheless, it's a good time to bring everyone in because this document touches everybody from legal to finance to operations. I would recommend looking at all of those checkboxes and working with your legal team and your finance teams to understand what are your preferred settings, what you're okay with, and then what you will not accept. This will ultimately speed, one, it's good for submitting comments, and two, later when you start operating, let your employees know what they can accept automatically and what they should get approval for, and then what they know the company will absolutely not accept. That's a very powerful tool to empower your people with, and it will speed up the legal process. And then on to the comment portion, like gather your feedback and submit it to the IAB. There's a bunch of different ways that it can be done. You can submit general comments, you can submit specific ones. It has to be in writing. And if you want to be anonymous, it can be anonymized. Just reach out to us or talk to Angelina. Well, I'm sure you can find an email address that would suffice to send it through.
You can find that on the actual document itself and on the website. But I do think that you can collect feedback from an organization and represent your organization. And therefore, the more organizations that come back with specific feedback, and we see that there is consistent feedback for a particular term, that will bubble up and be a priority to address. So the more comments we get, the more we can address, and we'll work this through with the task force and have open discussions about, here were some comments that came in, what do we think? How do we adjust this? There are additional options, like, for example, if there's a certain section that isn't modular, that doesn't have checkboxes, if we get a various different versions for those terms, we may then opt to make that modular, right? Or make that a checkbox. So more feedback you can provide if there's anything missing, anything that you think we should add, or anything that we should remove. This is the time to speak, and we'd appreciate it.
That concludes our formal presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think one thing that some people might struggle with is that they want to see the addenda that specifically applies to their use case and probably see it that way. But I guess there's an aspect of going like, that's not how this is going to work. So kind of like get past that, review what you can, anticipate where the other parts are going to go. Angelina walked through earlier with me a bit of the direct sold addendum, and it is much more expansive than
Even this one. That one's
yes,
40 pages right now.
yeah, and that's amazing. And you want to help her with that, but you can't go, I'll wait to see that to then come back to this. So, in my mind, again, just reiterating some of what Scott's already said, to work with your legal teams to understand the modular fashion of this and just going like, this is going to be a little bit different. So you can get your processes in place so that you can do that. And I really like what Shannon just said about your actual finance and controllers should be involved in this conversation as well.
Yeah.
This is something again where you're just going to want to understand the impact this has on your business. To Scott's point, this is either going to be more things fly faster, or everything gets jammed up, slows down, or everyone goes back to the old ways. And the old ways, you're just going to recognize that you're not represented in the documents as well as you need because it doesn't reflect the business as it is today. So,
And I just want to
important.
reiterate that the general terms is really to focus on not on just the direct buys, but all types of agreements, and typically where there is friction, and where there are red lines. So this is why we focused on the force majeure, the reps and warranties, and the liability section most heavily, and the payment terms. Which, if I can as well, just a
Yes, please.
quick we also released digital invoicing API specifications. This is specifically geared towards the publisher community to enable them to work with their financial invoicing platform to send over invoices electronically, especially to systems like Prisma. So this is kind of referenced in the general terms of electronic delivery of invoices. So the faster you can get those invoices and ensure that there is a stamp that is marked when those invoices are received, this will make you guys get your payments much quicker. So I work with the Media Ocean very closely to create these specifications, and would love your financial teams and their invoicing platform partners to weigh in.
Great. I'm going to go through the chat and start to build off and ask those questions, make sure we covered everything. Again, there's a question about where the addenda are, and they're not linked, they're not available yet. But again, people feel free to jump in or add to this.
Can I ask a question, Rob?
Please.
Sorry for interrupting. Nice to meet you all. I regarding your answer, Angelina, you said it's a 2-3 years process. Is this timeline valid for the entire process of the new terms and conditions, or solely for the purpose of establishing the addenda?
So I believe the way that I'm looking at it is that the general terms cannot work on its own, right? It needs to have an addenda attached to it. So when we roll out the first addenda, which is the direct buys, and hopefully that will go out into public comment by January, if we get enough participation this summer into the second half of this year, and we can get that released and get through, there's like 30 sections, 35 sections to actually go through. Then we can release the addenda, and hopefully the direct buys can then, once that's out of public comment, we can start using that. So that's going to include probably a direct buy, sponsorships, co-reg, lead gen, and email, right? There might be different parts to it. And then we'll work on the DSPs, SSPs versions right after that next year.
Great
Thank
question.
you. And a follow-up question on that, if you don't mind. Is there an anticipated or a desired, let's say, turning point from which we no longer use the old terms and conditions, and somehow the IB is going to enforce the usage of the new terms and conditions? I'm sorry for if it's a rookie question. I'm not coming from the legal
Yeah.
world.
Unfortunately, IAB is a trade association. We do not enforce standards. We issue standards. I would say that the publishers and the buyers are the enforcers. So the more you can push your partners to adopt these terms, the faster the faster that this becomes an actual standard. But it doesn't become a standard until people start using it.
Yeah, thank you.
One thing that popped up, good questions though. Thank you for asking and feeling free to ask them. Like again, I want people to ask questions, even if you're like, even the general questions like that. Lila makes kind of the point about having legal teams actually do red lines, and I'm kind of curious of that, Angelina, in terms of actually getting the feedback. Would that be helpful to have actual red lines to it, or is it
Yeah.
okay? Then
You can either take the document, redline it, send it off to us. We'll do the compare,
okay.
contrast, and make note of it. Or you can give us a Word document or an email and tell us section 3, bullet 2A, please modify or add as section E or whatever. So we take anything, or if you want to, just a general comment about certain sections. Hey, overall, it's missing this. We'll take that as well. However is easiest for you, we'll do the work. I'll make Scott do the work, but Ivy does.
I
Scott's
thought you could enforce
I'm
anything.
absent for that week.
Um, Side note, well, two things. So one, some of your comments, Jeff, I feel are like things for you, like again, are getting into specific language and whatever. Again, I would sit there and say that that's for those calls or for you to submit, then getting reaction here, like you're putting it in the chat does not count. You need to go through the process. Um, One thing I'll just throw out again for the technology companies that are on here, uh, look, this is about partnership. This is about working together. Help publishers understand your take on these terms as well. And I say it the way that I did because, again, there is going to be an aspect of, uh, you know, um, guiding people, saving them time to get to successful conclusions and being able to do more business. So I just sit there and think that like all of you are sitting there thinking about what this impacts for your business. Think about what the impact is to your clients as well, and good opportunity by which for you to show some thought leadership in these other areas. Um, Brian's comment, what does this initiative sound like on the buy side in terms of talking points and benefits? It feels like it's set up the buy and middle to have more say in the authenticity of media.
I'm not quite sure I really understand that question.
Yeah, so this seems interesting in terms of like the setup here on dispute resolution, kind of streamlining. There's more of that happening, in the space. And I'm just curious on the buy side of the equation, what is this conversation like? What are the initiatives and what are the problems they're trying to solve?
So first off, I think, well, having been on the buy side and leading ad ops for Dentsu and Merkle and was the primary contact for negotiating all these terms with every individual publisher, is one is trying to keep up with technology and all the various different terms and knowing that you as the publisher are dealing with different addendums from different agencies and each of them interpreting different things, like the way they have viewability, or when it comes to sponsorships and cancellation terms and more of the business side. Most of the buyers, I would say, their initial reaction was, "We already have our agreements with the trade desk, uh, and and so why would we need to do this, right?" My question to you is, with new data protections rolling out, especially globally, and then with AI, and then you think about the whole data usage and what's being shared, especially data clean rooms and all of that, that those are additional terms that they're going to continue adding on and on and on and on. So why don't we ensure that at least, and it takes them what, 6 to 9 months to finalize a contract with a particular vendor. This will help you streamline. And let's make sure that things like programmatic buys or programmatic extensions, automated guarantees, right? I know that you as publishers with your programmatic buys, if they cancel an automated guaranteed or a private marketplace deal, you guys have, there's no recourse, right? You lose revenue and they don't pay a penalty, right? So this provides, is there notice? And things like that. So I think overall, right now, the reaction is like, we're good with 2.0. Someone's still on 2.0, and we're good with 3.0 with our 30-page addendum. But if you guys force and say, hey, there's a clause in 4.0 that we need to renegotiate because this is better, it's going to force them to start looking at 4.0. Crap, that called it 4.0, but okay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's better than terms and conditions 95, which is what I recommended. It was not the best name of a new version. Um, yeah, and I think, I mean, again, like I keep just throwing it out there in terms of getting involved. I meant to be more involved than I have, but obviously been on event harvesting season. There is also an aspect of this of hearing, Brian, maybe kind of your point. In these conversations, you really hear where the buyers are like concerned. And so there's an aspect of like, how are they trying to protect themselves? And that's important information to know. Like that's just a part of the overall piece of this, is just understanding of, again, how we're going to build out these agreements. And I think this modular approach makes a lot of sense. It has been too long since this has been updated. I was always fearful that someone was going to anoint me to have to deal with this. And when Angelina said that she was working on terms and conditions, I did a little silent cheer. Not for her, because unfortunately she's had to go through all this and all these politics, but thank God it isn't me. This would not be my cup of tea. Anything I mean, the only thing I would throw out to you is again, like Scott made kind of mention and put it out there, like sequential liability, like clawbacks, all these things. It's there to be discussed. Um, do you win all these things? Probably not. Will you lose these things if the agreements are built in a way? Yes. So, I think the one thing that I can say is that there may be some things here where, again, individually reach out to the IAB with comments or red lines, talk about this internally, but also if there's an aspect of, hey, how are you thinking about this? That we want to get people to sit there and have that conversation. Happy to facilitate whatever it is, just as long as, again, we understand that there's a process here.
Yeah.
And
Or
it's the beginning.
participate in the task force.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like that's where to be. Anything else? Well, if not, I have a feeling the recording of this, Scott and Angelina, are going to be shared with a lot of people to help give them, and the deck. Thank you, Scott, for again giving this form. Is something that probably every company in our universe should be looking at and evaluating, and then getting involved and commenting or dealing with the consequences. So, Scott, Angelina, thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you,
Rob,
Scott,
thank you
for
very much for
doing
the
everything.
space.
You
Yeah,
got it.
appreciate it. Angelina,
And
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
it was
Thank you all.
11 minutes. Take care.